Welcome all of you. As they say on the late night talk shows, we're back from our summer hiatus. And we're really pleased to see so many familiar faces and a number of new attendees as well. And if this is your first Cornerstone meeting, would you please raise your hand? Okay. I thought there were more. So we're honored tonight to have with us Mr. Joe Ferguson, President of the Civic Federation, to talk about the case for a charter for the city of Chicago. A charter is similar to a constitution and outlines a city governance and operational framework, which Chicago lacks. In fact, Chicago is the only major city in the country without a charter. Now, we know that you all showed up here tonight to hear Mr. Ferguson, but we also promised to feed you. So there will be dinner, and before we move on to dinner, I'd like to offer a brief prayer. Dear God, things are difficult here on your beautiful earth. Many of us are anxious, fearful, and unsure of how to proceed in the seeking of the peace and justice that you intend for us. Help us to listen for your voice, the voice that assures us that in the end, all will be well. But in the meantime, we have work to do. Hold our hands and our hearts and help us step out into our city with faith, determination, and the gifts of each other. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
The beginning of the progressive era, when in the United States we were puzzling over what cities needed to be and do. When I say we, I wasn't there then. The people who were there at the time here in Chicago, because it was Chicago-based in its formation, were what constituted diversity at that particular time. There was a banker, the founder of First National Bank of Chicago, now J.P. Morgan Chase, a philanthropist socialite, told you, diverse. Philanthropist socialite, Bertha Palmer of the Palmer House, okay? And Jane Addams, Nobel Prize winning social activist who devoted a great deal of her life to the causes and the betterment of immigrant communities and those who were disinvested and seldom enough heard. To effectively advocate for government to give them what they need. And so at that particular point in time, the question was, what did cities need to become and do in order to provide the foundational platform for well-being and thriving economy? At that particular point in time, cities did not do very much to support the populations. And so it was, what do we need with respect to the form of governance to provide for schools, to provide for transportation, safe drinking water, health, so on and so forth. And that was all at this period of time. Civic Federation has been doing that work ever since, and its primary emphasis quite often is tied to fiscal affairs. And fiscal issues here in this city, in this state, are in a state of crisis, okay? And so all of that to say, including having been the Inspector General for the city for 12 years under 3 mayors, for which the objective is the promotion through investigations and audits of economy, effectiveness, and efficiency in government, I have spent a lifetime not getting the job done. Because here we are. But one of the reasons it is so hard here is we're governed, or we govern ourselves differently from every other major city. It's not most other major cities. Of the top 15 cities in the United States, only one of them does not have. The word charters is used. That is what they technically are, and I'll tell you why in a second. But just think about the word Constitution. We live in, notwithstanding what's going on and that we read about in the daily news, we live under a rule of law in a constitutionally based society. We have 51 constitutions in the United States, one for each state, one for the national government. And and at the end, I'm going to tell you why it is that, notwithstanding how the Constitution seems to be working nationally right now, they still are the bedrock. But Chicago is the only major city in the United States that has no constitution as a municipality. We call them charters for this reason. The power at the national level is derived from the people. The power that the federal government took in the formulation of its constitution left everything else to the states. All of that authority is derived from the people as well. So the federal government has a constitution, the state has constitutions, municipalities, localities, and cities only exist pursuant to grants from the state. They're corporations, basically. And so the word, and many of us know this, corporations have charters. The corporate charter, which is their governance system, but that applies actually to localities as well. So that's why the word charter, but don't even think about the word charter. We're talking about a constitution, and what we're seeing right now is why it's important that we have a rigorous constitution at all levels, but what does it mean for Chicago? The lack of one means we lack a framework for accountable, transparent, inclusive decision-making and oversight. And so I'm going to go through a very quick bill of horribles about aspects of recent history and the state of our city that everybody is going to know. But it's important to understand and feel them all at once. And so, because we lack that governing framework, political leaders routinely make bad decisions with severe adverse legacy consequences. And when I say legacy, it's not a bad outcome in a particular moment, but there are aspects of how we govern ourselves that have long-running effects. Little accountability to them. Parking meters, we sold them, okay? Skyway, casino, not here yet. It'll be here at some point. Certainly not coming in the way it was billed at the front end. NASCAR, people have different views about that, but nobody asked us. Stadium deals, past and present, we owe hundreds of millions of dollars on the refurbishing of Soldier Field, which we are still on sort of the lingering tail conversation about whether we might rebuild Soldier Field, having only refurbished it 20 years ago. And when we refurbished it, we did it with financing that has resulted in us still owing hundreds of millions of dollars on it. Crime. We struggle with crime. For years, more homicides and shootings, and I put it in terms of years because we are having that reversion to the mean of an extraordinary nature in this city and nationally, in which the generationally high levels of crime, particularly violent crime, that we have all lived with, seen, and internalized in some respect in this city is thankfully going down, but it's still extraordinarily high. But more homicides and shootings annually, typically, than Los Angeles and New York combined. No, we don't have the highest crime rate, the highest violent crime rate in the country, but in terms of our peer cities, people who want to live in cities, we don't show up very well. We routinely rank among the most segregated and inequitable of the major U.S. cities. And to this legacy issue, structural deficits. So under law, generally, all governments, including the city pursuant to state law, have to pass a balanced budget each year. Here's the thing about balanced budgets. They only need to be balanced at the moment that they're passed. So that means the numbers at one side of the ledger, the revenues and the resources, the financial resources that are going to be used for that budget year, and the expenditures, they balance out. And so you are technically balanced if they balance at the moment. Those numbers are the same at the moment that you pass it. But we use all sorts of tricks. Tricks is a pejorative term. We use all sorts of techniques in order to marshal the money. And it's not simply raising taxes. It's not simply raising fines and fees. It is drawing upon other sources. And one of the bad things in our history that we do less of, but what we still do, is that we borrow money for certain operating costs. all right? We use one-time revenue sources that come out of nowhere, that sort of found money, for what we know to be continuing expenditures, which means after we use it next year, we have programs that we can't pay for. We have employees on the rolls that we can't pay for. And we come up with new accounting mechanisms to deal with them each year, as if it's a transactional exercise in that moment in time, and the result is mounting deficits. Severely underfunded pensions and long-term debt load. And so one of the ways that we balance budgets over the years, pension holidays, not paying into pensions. Our pensions are the most underfunded in the United States. They are more underfunded in the city of Chicago. Our pension obligation liabilities are greater than 44 of the states in the United States. And long-term debt load, going back to we borrow for all sorts of things, and then we do this thing called scoop and toss over the years, where we borrow new to refresh the term under which we're paying back as we're borrowing even new money for new purposes. And I'm going to use this to just talk about one concept to keep in mind, because when I was asked to talk about this, sort of put in terms of morality. Why? Because we're here, right? And when we talk about underfunded pensions and long-term debt load and the need to pay all of these things back, we generally talk about them in terms of taxes. We sometimes talk about them in terms of economic development and growth that will increase the revenue sources. And so it's like, okay, the government wants more money from us. What we don't enough talk about is the fact that in the city of Chicago, 40% of our net operating expenditures are for pension service and debt service. 40%. Jesus Christ has nothing to do with that. All right? And here is the point. What that means is 40% of the money that goes into the government each budgeting year is not going to pay for the services that you expect, that is represented is going to be provided for you, and that a lot of our population absolutely needs. Cities have to handle all of the consequences of the externalities of free markets. If it can't be rendered profitable, it's something that then gets left to local government to figure out. And so all of the inequities, all of the burdens, they're left to cities, and then we end up with this. And all of this does result in higher taxes that are at such a level that they stifle economic growth and are disincentives for people to come here. I'll get off the bill of horribles after this slide. Decades of struggles to keep residents from leaving. Our population is right now about 1 million below its peak. When was its peak? 1950. And was declining steadily ever since until about 1990, and then it has just sort of plateaued at a low level. In order for this city to thrive, with respect to economic activity, tax base, property tax base, we need about 3.3 million people. Right now we're at 2.7 million people, and in 1950 we were at 3.6 million people. That is not a recipe for growth. Of the 15 largest cities in the United States, 13 of them are at their population peak right now, and growing. 2 are not. Of those 2, 1 is growing again. It's Philadelphia. We're getting our asses kicked by Philadelphia people. That shouldn't be allowed ever. Approximately $1 billion in police misconduct claim payouts the last decade. This year alone, announced in a story TTW, Heather Sharon, I think it was, through July, we have had $231 million in police liability payments, judgments and settlements, when the line item in the budget is $82 million. That line item in the budget has been the same line item in the budget for about 15 years. And every year we go over it, and guess what? We don't raise it, understanding that in reality, we're going to have to pay out more. Where does that money come from? It comes from 2 places. One, we borrow to pay some of those judgments in some years. And then we have this thing in the budget where we don't fill vacancies, and those vacancies become holding places. where we can draw money to pay out settlements that we don't want to acknowledge. Can everybody hear me?
No.
Okay, you can't hear me. Can everybody else hear me? All right. And the city council routinely ranks among the most criminally corrupt in the United States. So our governance structure, we do have laws. The Cities and Villages Act of 1941. How many people here were born before 1941? Yeah, not too many. Right? Which really is just a slim upgrade from the Cities and Villages Act of 1870. I'm not going to ask the question who was born before 1870. But we have a 19th century form of government, right, that has not evolved with our needs and what we are. Those core elements, citywide officers, mayor, treasurer, city clerk, and a city council that in 1923 was 75, now it's 50. And the only thing that is set forth besides who the elected officials are in meaningful detail is that the city council draws its own districting map. It's a self-interested exercise. And there have been efforts, and I'm not going to say the words fair map because then Abigail's going to come up here and start talking. And the city council passes the budget, that technical thing that is balanced for one day of the year, and that's about it. Where does the rest come from? The machine and broad home rule authority that all gets poured into the municipal code, which is enacted by the mayor and the city council, and it evolves over time, that is entirely unenforceable by the people of the city. That's law. It's unenforceable law. It's why constitutions matter. Constitutions are a higher form of law that can't be changed on the fly by the people with the vested interests, and they're enforceable, if written the right way, by the people of the jurisdiction. And the last time our government structure was truly examined was about 70 years ago, and almost nothing changed. The governing reality, the mayor is the chief executive, presides over the city council, which means, for those familiar with how the federal government works, the mayor of Chicago is simultaneously the equivalent of the president and the speaker of the house. What? But that's how we work. Mayor calls the parliamentary balls and strikes in the city council on his proposals, because most of the proposals moving through are his or her proposals. The mayor chooses the chairs of the city council committees that oversee him or her. Legislative oversight, chaired by oversight committees for which the mayor, who's supposed to be overseen, is choosing the chairs. Corporation counsel, by custom, though not by law, first the mayor's lawyer, second the city council's lawyer. That ends up being a conflict of interest right there. But the one thing the corporation counsel is not is mayor for the corporation, meaning you. You are the shareholders of the corporation. The mayor sets the calendar for those oversight committees. The mayor sets the agendas generally for those oversight committees. And the city council's budget itself is generally constructed by the mayor. So the city council doesn't even have the resources necessary, if it was so inclined, and if it had the tradition of actually engaging in oversight. It doesn't have the resources that it needs, so it's historically understaffed, over-reliant, and routinely subservient. We're in a chaos moment right now that's very unusual in Chicago, but the norm is, if you really need something for your constituents in the ward, the mayor's going to be the one that makes sure that you get it, and that feeds the subservience. And so oversight has generally been an illusory Potemkin village. And I know there are people in the room who know exactly what that means. So what's a charter? It's basically a contract between the city government and the governed. You. Creates constitutional level changes in governance structure, resets the balance of power, and instills permanent accountability, and done according to national best practices set by the National Civic League, which has been in this business for over a century, working on its 9th model charter and its 6th guidance to charter commissions. It must be citizen-driven and approved. So, the vision. Chicago has the most effective, accessible, responsive, and accountable big city government in the United States. Who in the room thinks that's possible? So here's the thing, folks. We carry that aspiration in just about every other aspect of government, state level government, national government. That is part of our constitutional cultural DNA, to think in those terms. We don't think about Chicago in that way. Why? Because we don't have a constitutionally based culture, right? And having that though, and let me just say, I love drawing on this, in the Jewish tradition, there is no problem worthy of us that can be solved in a single lifetime. This won't be solved in a single lifetime in terms of getting to that place, but the road to getting there starts with the first step. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And this is where you start. And getting there allows us to align governance structure with 21st century challenges, needs, and values through a process that institutionalizes good governance, long-term, and sustainable, healthy civic engagement. Those are all great words, but let me just say one thing about Chicago and the region. We are fundamentally diverse in our economic base. We are rich in human capital, in educational institutions, in research institutions. We're in the middle of the country, which means we're geographically optimally located. We have something that nobody else in the country has, that for you, your children, your grandchildren is going to be more important every single day. Water. And weather. And climate change will bring changes in all of that. And I will be a little bit snarky here. All the SOBs that have gone to Florida are getting tired of standing in water and rebuilding. And all the SOBs that went to the Southwest are now tired of the dry heat being so hot that they have to be indoors 7 or 8 months of the year. They're coming back. Are they coming here? They're not going to come here without good governance in place that is actually governing from a perspective of what our long-term infrastructure needs are to provide the base for a thriving region and economy, okay? And you don't get to that without the systems in place in government that drives that. So some recent charter revisions in other major cities and some elements, and I'm not going to talk about them all, I'm just going to tick off some of the things, and you see them here, and we'll make sure you get that, and the handouts that are available, I'll explain to those things. But a lot of these cities have elected comptrollers. That makes sure that the person who's watching over what money we have and the flow of the money in and out is not somebody appointed from the mayor's office. And in Chicago, what we have is the mayor appoints the comptroller, the mayor appoints the budget director, the mayor appoints the CFO. And so the person who tells us how much money we have and who decides where that money is coming from and projects into the future and then decides how it is that we're going to spend it in the form of a budget that's going to be put forward is all appointed by one person, that one person not being adequately overseen by the legislature, being the city council, which is under-resourced and underpowered. But there are some things here that should jump out to people. Elected comptroller, independent budget office. In New York City, they have about a 50-person independent budget office written into their constitution. It's like the Congressional Budget Office. Budgets and all legislation with major financial impact goes to be scored by this professional office, and it's reported back to the city council and everybody, that analysis, and then flows into hearings on the basis of rich understanding of the weaknesses and strengths and the fiscal and the financial benefits and costs, the cost-benefit analysis of all forms of legislation. We have nothing like that. A rigorous budget process that's set out, citizen referenda, campaign finance structures, independent redistricting. Oh, I said redistricting, fair maps. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to say that, Abigail. Ranked choice voting, debt ceilings in some cities. To go higher than the debt ceiling, there needs to be a vote on it like we have in Congress. Yes, that can go in all sorts of funky places. When there's divided government, we don't have divided government here. We have one party, but that means we need to be protected, right? So debt ceilings, term limits, electoral recall. Now, it needs to be set at the right level, so we're not constantly seeking to push people out of the office, but it has a chastening effect, right? And so on and so forth. And we'll make sure that you have this. So can we fix this? And what I want to do is have everybody just ask questions about all kinds of things, and I'm happy to stay here as long as folks want. Yeah, but only if we try. All of our peers do it. And when I say do it, it's not create these things in the first instance because everybody's already got them, but all of them have a process by which their constitution is in constant evolution through a referendum process and a periodic constitutionally defined revision or amendment commission. Okay? Say how are our needs evolving? How is the government working in relation to those needs? Do we have the right inputs? Do we have the right accountability with the right metrics to understand if we're doing it right or not? But structure alone is not enough, and I'm going to go lofty because I like teaching in law school. Federalist 55. I'm going to go way old school on everybody, but we're all old school here, right? A Republican government, more than any other, relies on the virtue, wisdom, and trust of its people to choose honest leaders and ensure the common good, and without it, a republic cannot endure. It's ultimately up to us. And the creation of a charter comes through a process that as soon as somebody asks the question, I will explain this once I stop talking off of this deck. This picture here, this is the 6th City Hall of Chicago. It is in a state of deconstruction. So let me tell you a little story about the 6th City Hall of Chicago. We all know the 7th one. The 6th one was built in exactly the same place, which is where the 5th one was. The 5th one burned down in the Chicago fire of 1871. So one of the things that was top of mind is that we built a structure actually that wouldn't burn down, right? We built this thing, and it was finished in 1885. It took 10 years to build. They built pyramids faster. It was poorly designed, so it was almost obsolete for its function the moment it went into operation. It was over budget by 200%. That 200% mostly had to do with bribes and graft connected to the building of it, shock of shocks. And it was 3 years overdue in the building in terms of the schedule of things, right? And when it was built, I mentioned it was obsolete in terms of its structure and design. It was fantastic. It had all these wonderful features, but there weren't big rooms in it. We're supposed to convene there, right? But there were some other things as well. Started operation in 1885. They started planning for the next one about 5 years later because of the space limitations. In 1905, there was a fire in City Hall. A bunch of people were injured, a bunch of things destroyed on the inside. And it was revealed that they didn't have anywhere near enough fire escapes. So a building that was supposed to be constructed in order to safeguard against the potential of fire wasn't even built because it wasn't built to code. And finally, the minute it was finished, one corner of it started sinking. And that fire was triggered by the fact that the walls had separated to a point in one area where the boilers were, that the boilers were becoming disconnected from the wall, and that is where the fire started.
Oh my God.
That's old Chicago, and unfortunately, in too many respects, it's the Chicago we know today, right? So how do we fix it? It's us. A lot of people here know Pogo. Remember Walt Kelly, the cartoonist, one of the great political cartoonists of the mid-20th century. The tagline for Walt Kelly was, "We have met the enemy, and the enemy is us." We get to change it. And there is a set process with best practices and a pathway to do it. And there are people, including somebody who is much beloved by a number of people in this room, who's actually moving it at the state legislative level, Cam Buckner. And there are people in the city council who are actually moving this. But we have to get busy too. I'm here with a friend and a colleague, Joel Hammernick. Joel, raise your name. There is a coalition of nonprofit groups that are working quietly to actually lay the groundwork for this. And Joel's organization, newly formed, A More Just Chicago, which has foundation backing initially and is soon to, I expect, have a whole bunch more, is there to do the education, outreach, and engagement of the population across this city, all 77 neighborhoods, to actually do the civic education to understand it is about us and we can do something about it. We need a constitution if we are going to be. 2037 is the bicentennial of the city of Chicago. We need to build the city that we need to be then, now, with the people who are going to lead it then. 12 years in our lifetimes, snap of fingers for young people, it seems like forever, but it's within this window where we have to get busy now in order to optimize all of our strengths and our glorious diversity of all aspects of our life. And that is done through a system of checks and balances with the supporting structures that make sure that there is proper analysis for good decision making and accountability that follows it on the back end. And in the rest of the United States, all of those things are found in municipal charters, constitutions. I'll end there. All right, there is a button in the lower center of the panels in front of you, and fire away. This place don't jump. Yes.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Someone else started?
Yep, say your name.
I'm.
No, we can't hear you yet.
I'm John Hoftig. I've been a member of Fourth Church forever, and I grew up in Minnesota, but I lived in and around Chicago for 50 years. I'm going to frame the issue a little differently and ask you what the basic problems of a city without a charter is. Is the basic problem that a city without a charter can't do anything special or extraordinary without going to the state legislature and playing Mother May I and asking permission to do things? Or is the basic problem that a city without a charter, the mayor and the city council can do almost anything willy-nilly without constraint?
It's the latter. It's the latter, willy-nilly without constraint, because there are no constitutional standards. There are no procedural guidelines that are baked into a higher form of law that assures that there is the information. That information is analyzed. It's brought forward in public ways that involves public engagement around critical issues to elevate decision-making. The consequence of no charter is bad decision-making by self-interested people historically. And there are many people in government who do it for good reasons, or at least carry the notion that they're doing it for good reasons. It doesn't mean that they're making the right choices at the front end because they don't have the right inputs. And then once those decisions are made, they don't have the accountability mechanisms and standards to assure that we are actually following up to see whether we're actually succeeding in what it is that we've decided that we're going to do, and we're going about it the right ways. And we are pursuing better ways all the time, and thereby making the best use of the money that the taxpayers are paying. That's the essence of it. We make better decisions with the proper inputs and the proper standards and accountability mechanisms on the back end to make sure that we have better outcomes. You were second.
Yes, it's, excuse me, sorry. It's just overwhelming hearing your description of the problems. So can you suggest something that a person such as myself can actually do rather than just sit here and feel terrible about the city?
So my friend Joel here,
Okay.
More Just Chicago,
He's the key.
is you should introduce yourself to him and give him your context. And so here is the basic concept of what he's going to be doing. While people are pursuing the, the proper legislative channels, because ultimately this is going to require legislative approval at the state level to create a charter commission in the right way. But 77 neighborhoods, he is now walking the neighborhoods with his team to identify basically what will be ambassadors, key leaders in each of those neighborhoods, who will then in turn also know, because they are of the neighborhood, who the real leaders are in the neighborhood, identifying therefore 25 to 30 leading members who become the touchstones and the fonts for what are then active, engaged forums and discussions, utilizing educational materials that originate from the Civic Federation and other entities that are user-friendly, but you start to have that engagement. And part of that engagement also involves people understanding things well enough to go to their legislators and say, where are you on this? That then creates the energy for them to understand the state that we're in is no longer acceptable to anybody. And the definition of insanity is to do the same things over again and expect different results. We need to do something different from here, but not different from everywhere else. Chicago's exceptionalism is to say we are different, but we're not. And this works better, and no city works well because it's a messy, gloriously messy democratic affair. But most cities do work better than Chicago. So talk to that guy over there. I'm going to go to the back of the room and then come back to the left. Yes.
I kind of have two, and I'm sorry about that, but I grew up in Chicago and have followed a lot of it, not too far from where Mike Royko grew up, and he talked about all these things. But a real technicality is, the first part is, how do we exist when in the olden days in England, you had to have a charter to have any authority to do anything? And then the second question is, as a citizen, I'm not going to be walking the street looking for people because I live downtown and State and Grand is filled with people who kill each other. So I can't. So what can I do? And is there, a letter writing campaign for Alderman Riley is mine. I don't know why they haven't done anything, because it's like you keep campaigning, but in any event, doesn't matter.
So yes, letter writing campaign, and that takes all sorts of forms now. That's email blast, that's social media, that's all sorts of things. And an organization like More Just Chicago actually enables people in understanding what mechanisms are available to them, provides them with the information, and they tap into their networks and so on and so forth. It's organizing what we're talking about at a basic level. But when you mention Alderman Riley, here's the thing: aldermen need to be taught about this as well. When it was first mentioned by Nancy, we're the only city without a constitution, there was a bit of a gasp in the room. Aldermen are being taught that through the efforts that we're making. State legislators are being taught. It's unimaginable even to them. It's unimaginable to our business leaders that we have a corporation that has a $17 billion budget, 32,000 employees, 2,000 contractors, and all sorts of subcomponents, and there's no governance system for meaningful, standard-based decision-making and accountability. They gasp because they've lived in this city, and they love the city as well. So it's that. So there's all sorts of ways to do it from your living room, from your neighborhood. You know more people than you realize, and once you get connected to new people, that goes places as well. So there's lots of ways to do it. Talk to my friend Joel. Okay, this side of the room here.
Yeah, all great comments. I just want to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah.
This is not right now. Oh, I'm sorry. Charters are not top of mind
Nope.
in the city unless you read religiously Crane's or the Tribune. You don't even know what a charter is.
That's right.
If I walked from here to the river and asked 100 people anything about the charter,
Yep.
I would get blank stares.
Yep.
There's no chatter on social media.
Here's why.
There's no discussion of this beyond the intelligentsia who want to see it changed.
So, it's not even part of our lexicon. We don't have a constitutionally based civic culture here because we've never had one. The culture itself is part of this. The terminology is part of this. It's still, I've talked about conceptually, and there needs to be a shift, and this is why it needs to be sort of community-based organizing. Almost all of those 77 neighborhoods and communities, they have different histories with people with different backgrounds, with different needs, different objectives. We have been to go to Mike Royko, Urbs and Hortus, Ubi es Meo. Where's mine? And the mine is oriented towards, we are acculturated to a mindset where we're looking to government to give us certain things. It's not a relationship that we have. It is transactional. And that is part of why the conversations and the understanding of the histories and the language, the language nuances need to span. It's a big effort, but part of that, separate and apart from whether the legislation gets passed and whether or not that lands with a commission that actually does the work the right way, all of that is civic engagement and dialogue that expands this understanding that we are different in a bad way. And that bad way is something that everybody, no matter which neighborhood they are in, the richest and the poorest, everyone has experientially based knowledge of it not working well. We need to provide them with the language and the understanding that this is a medium through which we all together can start to make it work better. Working better, again, does not mean you get specific things. There are basic services that everybody should get. Do we have the mechanisms to assure? I've been using this term for years. People know what a heat map is. You have all sorts of data, and you do that for city services, you do that for tax burdens and so on and so forth. And on a heat map, you look at the geography. And if a certain area is red, that's bad. A certain area is green, that's good. Chicago, there is one heat map that you could slap 1,000 titles on for 1,000 subjects. It's the same damn thing. It's the same people who don't get, the same people who get better, right? But the ones who get better don't even feel the experience of it getting better. Why? Because they have to pay a hell of a lot for it. And nobody understands what the give-get is, what the cost-benefit is of the relationship, but we don't have a relationship because we are oriented towards what we can get, ubi es meo. Here, and then over here.
What then, when we're trying to explain this to someone, what would be the result if we do in fact get a charter? And what can we say, this is what you would see happen? More investment, whatever. What would we get as a result of a charter?
So that would depend on what we, the people, decided we wanted in our Constitution, what sort of guardrails and limitations that we want. But I want to give you an example very quickly. I always say quickly, but it never works out quickly, but I'm going to try to do this quickly of one of the most important things, how we go about the budgeting process. It is largely held by the mayor, the executive, and we have these sort of milestone reports that come out that predict all sorts of horribles, but in point of fact, the budget will get released in mid-October. And within days, without the analysis having been done, we'll start budget hearings. And those budget hearings will be over in 2 weeks. At the Harris School, I had students actually do a comparison of how much time in 1 year budget hearings in Chicago were devoted to the budget versus how much time they're devoted to the budget in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, the answer was 78%. In Chicago, our budget hearings, we actually talk about the budget 12% of the time. Because it's about one of the only times of the year that commissioners from the various service departments are in the witness box and aldermen can question them about services that their constituents aren't getting. Here's how it goes in New York City. And I'm going to go back to New York City. I go to New York City for a bunch of this stuff. Doesn't mean it's working perfectly. But their constitution, things in their constitution, the accounting standards, the budgeting standards, these are mandated by law, okay? And they're audited on that basis. All of the components of a budget, it's a two-stage process that happens not over 2 weeks, and in a bad year, 6 weeks. It happens over 5 months. And stage one is a mandatory requirement that all the departments report current year data on the basis of the existing year budget, goes to this independent budget office and gets analyzed, comes back to the city council, and they hold hearings on how things are going right now, okay? How do they get that information? Here's some things about Chicago. In Chicago, the city council doesn't have a right to information from the executive branch, from the mayor's office. It is a mother may I world, okay? So there's a lot of hide the ball that goes on. They don't have subpoena power if there isn't cooperation. In New York City, it's written into the Constitution. Executive branch has to comply and cooperate with the legislative branch. They have to provide the information. If they don't provide the information, there's mechanisms for enforcing that. And in this Constitution, by the way, if it's something that matters to us that we're not seeing, there's a basis for going to court and enforcing that provision of the Constitution as regular citizens. But in New York, all that information's got to goes to the independent budget office. That gets reported out publicly. There's level 1 hearings. Stage 2, on dates specified. All the departments under the mayor's control have to submit their budgets. Where does that information go? It goes to the independent budget office, and it all gets analyzed again, and we all understand the cost benefits and the issues. That gets fed back to the city council, and there's real budget hearings, okay? All of that to the original question, what do we get out of it? We get the checks and balances, the standards, and the mechanisms that assure that all of the inputs necessary for good decision making, and it doesn't mean that we're gonna make good decisions all the time, but we're certainly gonna know what the really bad decisions are. And it's not just our legislators, it's all of us. In the first instance, given the history of this city, the mitigation of really bad decision making ought to be counted as a win, right? So that's an example. Okay, I'm gonna go, we're gonna go here. I'm gonna go as long as you guys wanna go, so.
Chicago must have been doing something right because we are a sanctuary city. And in this situation that we are in now, where there is a national emergency, I wonder I know how passionate you are about your subject. I am equally as passionate about what's happening to this country. I don't see a connection between having a charter constitution as a city and how to respond using that mechanism to address the national emergency that we're in. We are a sanctuary city, and that is something that I think we should all be extremely grateful for and proud of. And I don't see that having a charter or not having a charter has any relationship to that.
And a lot of people don't. And that's one of the things in the moment. So one of the questions that I've gotten over the years is, well, Russia has a constitution, so why on earth is the Constitution going to make any difference, right? Constitutions can be empty documents. They could be Potemkin villages in and of themselves. I've gone back to this slide. This still depends on who we put in office, right? And in another slide, fair map drawing, campaign finance reform, the capacity for citizen referendum, which doesn't exist in Chicago. It doesn't exist. Recall capacities, these things actually all change the quality of the people who we elect. Sanctuary city, I'm guessing you know when that originated. Harold Washington. Harold Washington. And I'm going to say something that is sort of particular to the moment. When the mayor signed an executive order over the weekend, it was filled with the spirit of implementation of what the intent of sanctuary city status is, but he did it in a way that doesn't even understand the legal constitutional relationship of a municipality to the state or to the federal government. And that's because we ourselves don't govern ourselves by those standards. And so these moments come, and we're not nuanced. We don't actually know how to meet the enemy, if you will, utilizing the law effectively. And the other part that I read into your question is, how does the Constitution matter when we have a Constitution at the federal level and it is being ridden roughshod over, right? It comes back to this: we still have to elect the right people. And I teach national security law, which is a form of constitutional law, which actually bears upon this particular moment. And what I will tell you is we have a Congress over the years that has ceded enormous discretionary authority on the executive, thereby taking its hand off of the legislative oversight function, acquiescing to the king legislatively. So Constitution doesn't mean it lands all right. And that's why best practice for charter commissions, and I didn't expect to land at this point, but I'm glad you took me there, because you have taken me there, is every 5 to 10 years, you're doing an examination of how well your government lasts through a review commission and a revision commission. And along the way, the citizens can actually do a referendum to change particular things in the meantime. One of the problems that we have in the United States is we have an 18th century document, seldom amended since the mid to late 19th century, by which we're dealing with how to manage ourselves in the world today. And this is why every generation, Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to John Adams, when they were both in their older years, as most of you know, they both died on the 4th of July in 1825. In their last years, having been frenemies, they had this extraordinary correspondence. And Jefferson said, in 1825, the point in time the Constitution comes into existence in 1787, so 1825, we're talking 38 years. A couple years before he died, Jefferson writes to Adams, "I never intended for this Constitution to be a permanent document. The idea was we would revisit it every generation." We haven't revisited our national Constitution for many generations at this point, and in Chicago, we've never even gotten into the game. So we don't have the language, we don't have the basis, we don't have the culture, we don't have the understanding, because in the absence of those guardrails, lane dividers, standards, mechanisms, those feedback loops, it's a mystery how our government actually operates. And they orient us towards the get, not the relationship and not the standards that we're looking for. Doesn't answer your question completely, but there's a lot of dynamics that go into this. Over here.
I happen to be in an audience where you spoke to Skyline Village, Chicago a couple months ago. And at that time, I was as surprised as many people here might be that we didn't have a charter or a constitution in the city of Chicago. I would like you to address, there must be resistance to having a charter. I mean, the obvious things would be the mayor wants to have all the power. But where else is there resistance? I think somebody else talked to us at a meeting one time and mentioned the Chicago Teachers Union, for example, is strongly against having a constitution or a charter. Are there, what other resistance do you see?
So I'm going to be super reductive in the answer and then give you a few details. Whoever holds the power and controls the status quo is against this. And some of the people and the entities that you named 2 years ago, when I spoke to Skyline Village about this, they weren't in power. They were the folks that were trying to change the modality of power and who was in power, and they were all for this. And the minute they gained control of the mayor's office, they were against it. It's about who's in power, who has the control over the status quo. The flip side of that coin is what we would all regard to be old Chicago, the status quo going back forever, the business interest, the political interest, right? In a world in which we had mayors for 20 years. and the machine ran things. Those folks, for an election or two, were looking for a way to get a mayor back in office that would allow for a new version of the long-standing status quo. And now they understand that's not coming back. That doesn't exist anymore. That machine doesn't exist anymore. And so it's the old status quo that now wants to talk about this. It's about power.
I have a historical question. Major cities that established a charter, was the impetus mainly because of a movement by quote-unquote traditional conservatives or traditional liberals or Democrats or Republicans, or was it totally apolitical, or was the impetus a crisis or a special circumstance?
The simple answer to your question is yes. Okay, but I'm going to break that down a little bit. A number of major cities, their charter roots and the culture evolved from that period that I spoke of when the Civic Federation came into existence, the 1890s, the progressive era. Why? Because we knew that government as it existed in urban areas wasn't meeting the needs, and the needs were rapidly evolving. And so we needed to hit reset. In smaller cities, it often is the case, or even in bigger cities when they do a major reset. I'll give the example of New York. New York in the 1980s was because a combination of a constitutional law ruling that said a certain component of government violated one man, one vote, and because of a massive scandal in the third term of the Koch administration. I have a great story about it, Koch, and it would take me too long to tell you, but actually resulted in those that held power sort of yielding to the hue and cry that we need to change how we structure our government. In Los Angeles, a huge impetus was police misconduct, Rodney King. And so how we actually managed and governed the police department is a huge part of the impetus for charter reform in a city that had a charter that went back to the 1890s and it evolved over time. So sometimes it's higher order thinking in a historical inflection moment, but quite often it's a crisis that's rooted in scandal and the need to actually manifest that, okay, we get it, things have to change, you're really pissed at us, which means we might not get reelected, right? It's all of these things. It varies. Every city has its own history, its own culture, and its own origin story as well as evolution story for it. Over here.
Yes, I'm Tom. Thank you for coming and thank you for your services. Thank you for coming and thank you for your many years of service to the community. Kind of a little bit off base question. We all know that the National Guard is supposed to be arriving literally within hours. What do you see as the role of the National Guard, being that the city, for good reasons, does not want to cooperate with them? And what, if any, accountability would there be for the National Guard?
So, obviously an important question. So I'm gonna put on the law professor cap very briefly here. So to that earlier point that I made, that we have ceded a huge amount of power and discretionary power to the executive. A lot of those concessions driven by true emergencies, often national security emergencies, okay? And they stay on the books. And so we have basically an emergency statutory code that leaves the president almost without any check unless Congress pulls back the power. The reason that I say it requires Congress is that so many things allow for the president to decide whether the emergency exists, almost without bounds to discretion. And there is nothing to contain what the president does sufficiently once those emergency authorities and powers are exercised. In the context of the National Guard, Governor Pritzker's had this generally calibrated just right. ICE enforces federal law. They're supposed to do it within the bounds of the Constitution. The problem is that people who aren't citizens, and especially undocumented members of our community, they have lesser due process rights than the rest of us have, okay? Under the Enemy Aliens Act, which recently the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is in Texas, conservative, never goes against the president, has said the president overexercised his discretion utilizing the Enemy Aliens Act, which dates to the 18th century. With respect to ICE, though, there's immigration laws, those who are undocumented, and those who are documented that are having their status revoked are subject to this enormous power that the president has with minimal to no due process to simply remove them from the country. There's not much we can do about that unless Congress pulls back the strings or courts say you are exceeding the vague bounds of what your discretion is. The National Guard, there's a law from 1878, the Posse Comitatus Act, which doesn't have a noble history, I will tell you, but we need it right now, badly, is basically, unless there is express exception coming from Congress, we cannot use the military or the federalized military, which is the National Guard, for purposes of civilian law enforcement. There's some exceptions over the years, but there are a bunch of exemptions written into the law. One of those exemptions is the Insurrection Act of 1807, which is really the Insurrection Act of 1792. We're talking about 18th and early 19th century laws at a point in time when the capacities of government were very different, right? It gives the president extraordinary exemption under the right circumstances from the Posse Comitatus Act, which goes fundamentally to the essence that our military is controlled by a civilian authority, a civilian commander-in-chief, and is not to be used for domestic law enforcement purposes, but we have these exceptions. And so here's where the Insurrection Act comes into play. And in Los Angeles, they didn't utilize the Insurrection Act, they utilized a number of statutes that actually mirror and parallel those exceptions. But here in Chicago, here's what I'm afraid of. The timing of the ICE raids is purposeful in relation to Mexican Independence Day. It's the trigger event. And how our local government officials speak of it, how they respond to it, what they encourage the people under their authority to do, and what they encourage all of us to do, is a really delicate proposition. Governor Pritzker is right. He can't do anything about ICE. We can't do anything about ICE, although what we can do is we can go out and we can peacefully protest and we can document where we see and we can make sure that there's information that gets into the hands of those who are at risk of being picked up as to their actual due process rights, and we support the organizations that provide lawyers for them and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, ICE gets to do most of what we see ICE doing, most of it, not all of it. When it goes beyond those bounds, that has to be called. Lawsuits need to be filed. But for the National Guard, if we create the bare minimum circumstances that gives this president, who does not care about the law, the facial predication for saying a state of exception and a state of emergency exists, National Guard, the commander-in-chief authority of the governor of the state gets overridden by law, the president takes that over, and Governor Pritzker is right. There's nothing I can do about that. We'll file lawsuits, but in an administration that acts first and litigates later, too much is happening before we get the courts to actually say it. We're in a really hard place. We're in a really hard place. But we're in a hard place because of this exceeding to executives the notion that they have to protect us. And so we create these mechanisms for discretionary authority, which now are being abused, but always with a touchstone to the law, which means they end up getting litigated. And when they get litigated, the discretion is so broad that it's hard to figure out what the standards are. And courts need standards to call balls and strikes. So this is a constitutional moment for the country.
I'm curious. I've never seen anything in the Tribune about the need for a charter.
I can send you some stuff.
Okay.
The Trib editorial board has written.
They have written it?
Having this conversation, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ken Buckner's written about it, short. Ken Buckner's written op-eds in the Tribune, other newspapers. But the thing is, what happens is you have this moment, people are paying attention, but it's so easy to distract people. The world is moving so fast, the bandwidth to actually follow this stuff. Somebody mentioned people don't know about this, they don't have the time, they don't have the cost to carry to be civically engaged is so high for most people, whose time horizon is their next paycheck, whose time horizon is picking up their children after school, right? It's out there, and that is why ultimately this only happens if there is a broad-based organizing effort of people educated in understanding why this matters, and that there's something that can be done about it, not because we're making it up out of whole cloth, but because everybody else does it. So, it's there, we can get you stuff. Talk to that guy right there. That's gonna be my answer for everything. Yes. I'm gonna go right here and then you.
So for people in this room that would like to get involved with what you're doing in some way, my question is, do you or Joel have, say, 3 milestones that are the first stepping stones to say we're getting someplace with this?
The first is going to be actually the passage of legislation, and you're going to see that we're on the road to the passage of legislation authorizing the creation of a charter commission. You're going to see that traction is being gained because I expect to see in the next couple months subject matter hearings being held by legislative committees at the state level talking about this. And then you'll know people are paying attention. And then you'll see, as we move through what is going to be hella mess of a budget season in the city hall, you're going to hear aldermen actually say, enough is enough. We need to do this differently. Those will be the signals that people actually are getting this. It doesn't get you there because there will be forces arrayed against it, but that's why the education and outreach and engagement becomes really, really important, because people need to understand this isn't just a bad moment. This actually is an inflection point, and the people want something different. Right here, Abigail, and then to you. Yeah.
I'm not sure what. Oh, thank you. We don't vote in Chicago. This is probably a room of voters. As you go into the 77 communities, how is it going in terms of people being able to respond, not feeling disengaged from government altogether?
So that's a critically important question. So, you know, we can disagree over whether we have a good mayor or not right now, but I will tell you this. Our mayor, the mayor that we have right now, like the mayor that we had previous, was elected not by who voted for him, but who didn't vote at all. 2/3 of Chicago didn't vote. And that is a sign of a sick democracy. And a lot of that is some of the way that we set up the rules here. When we talk about, you know, at the state level, 17 congressional seats in Illinois are Democrat, 3 are Republican, and the reason is that we've largely gerrymandered that outcome. So people don't even believe their vote is gonna matter, right? 1. And 2, the districts are drawn in a way where it really doesn't matter. The outcome is almost foretold. Here in Chicago, we have our own version of it. Go back to the fact that under the Cities and Villages Act of 1941, the aldermen draw their own districts, right? And so part of the exercise that Joel's organization is going to have to do is to get people to understand, one, your vote actually matters, this is why it matters, and this actually is a potential outcome that changes the whole dynamic. But other things baked into our system in Chicago right now, there's a reason our elections are in February. It suppresses vote, the suppression of vote favors the incumbent. And it also staggers the city elections relative to all the other units of government that exist here. So you can run for another office without having to give up your own. You can keep your seat, try something else. If you get that better thing, great. If you don't get that better thing, you're good still, right? So all of these things factor. Who it is that is able to finance their elections, but bears upon, the quality of the choices that we have. Whether we have ranked choice voting, that was up there among the things that are written in the Constitution, so on and so forth. All of these things signal to the people that we're doing something different that should make them understand their vote matters. That's a big task, so I'm not saying it's easy, but again, we do the same old thing. There's no reason to think it's going to change. Okay, over here.
I assume that a charter in Chicago will equally impact the suburban people, and therefore indirectly, whether they do business in Chicago or whatever, and that they should equally care about this process and get educated and involved.
That's absolutely right. I'm going to tell you that suburban audiences are easier, and it's easier to find money with suburban audiences because they are scared about what happens if this city hollows out, and they have right to be scared about what happens. And what's also concerning is folks in the suburbs generally have the greater capacity to just leave altogether. And so there is sort of a domino effect to all of this. I'm really nervous about that. I wasn't. I don't know if you can tell. I believe in this stuff. I'm a proselytizer. But in this moment, for all sorts of reasons, including what's happening in Washington and how it bears upon what happens locally, but also the seriousness of how we go about making our decisions, I'm worried. We're out of runway. Mike Quigley recently said the B word, bankruptcy. The other outcome on the CPS budget vote the week before last would have sent CPS on the road to bankruptcy, which then would have tipped into the city because they're inextricably intertwined at this moment.
Especially now.
And the governor, the state does not have the money to bail everybody out. The state doesn't have the money to actually fund all of the federal programs for which funding is being withdrawn that goes to the state in the first instance before it flows down. It's not that the state doesn't have more capacity that can't be drawn upon. But the fact of the matter is that there's not enough money to go around in all of this. We are precariously perched right now, and the people in the suburbs know it. Back
Hear it all the time.
One of the things that I'm terribly concerned about and have been is the redistricting mess that people seem to ignore, and they say, in any event, they ignore it. But it's very important to me for a number of reasons. With Madigan gone, is this the time to really be able to do something because he won't be there?
Mike Madigan, I don't know what his inmate number is, or is going to be, he reports pretty soon, but he basically decided through the Democratic machinery who became Illinois Supreme Court justices, because we elect those justices, first appoint and then elect. And the last time we tried redistricting, Mike Madigan's Supreme Court, in a very, very cynical opinion, struck down the referendum effort as having not been calibrated in exactly the right way. There are new efforts that are beginning. This is the moment, and frankly, whether it's the moment or not, if not now, when? Right? Doing nothing guarantees an outcome.
But is there a greater possibility?
There absolutely is.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Joe, thank you so much for being here. I think we have to close it out. Nancy, are you going to have some closing words for us? Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. And Joe, thank you. This was just wonderful.